Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. This is the first breakout session on plant relatives. First breakout session this morning. I'm Mike Dockry. I'll introduce myself and then introduce the panelists. We'll have them kind of talk about their work and their ideas. I have a series of questions we'll run through, and then I'll open it up for people to put questions in the chat, or since we're in this setting, you can unmute yourself and also ask questions verbally if you prefer that over the chat. I am recording, so Bozo denwe maganak, kwabmat mushike manise Indigenous, chona kendikas and dodem, Nishnabe and Dao, Bodwadme and Dao. Hello everyone, I'm Mike Dockry. I'm serving as the moderator of this panel. I'm a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I've worked over the years with the College of Menominee Nation on a lot of climate change activities that we've done. I met one of our panelists, Deborah Mcgregor, at an earlier Shifting Seasons conference. It was a kind of a planning conference, and that was wonderful. And I have actually a picture that I use in some of my presentations of one of those sessions that we facilitated. It's hard to get pictures of what we do, but that's a great one. So I show Deborah, not every presentation, but definitely when I'm showing tribal engagement, I use that slide. It's very nice. Deborah's at York University up in Canada. Melanie Montano is our other panelist. I work with Melanie through her job with the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. Talked to her over the years. She's a traditional ecological knowledge specialist for Gliffwick. Worked quite a bit over the years now. We've been doing a project on restoration and protection of wild rice in the region. And so it's a real honor to have you as well. And then Jeff Grino. I knew Jeff from when I was at the College of Menominee Nation. I have several stories now that are popping up in my mind about Jeff's work. You know, Jeff really, when I was there, was helping the forest regenerate itself to make sure that the future generations of our plant relatives were going to be healthy and thrive on the Menominee forest. And Jeff is the kind of guy that you can go out there. One, he knows every plant in the woods, and he has many, many stories from his family, from his teachings about those plants, but also can just read the forest. He can point out old trails, village sites, agricultural, the raised bed gardening sites, etc. And so it's always been a pleasure for me and a learning experience to go out in the woods with Jeff. So with that short introduction to everyone, I would turn it over to you all to please kind of let everyone know who you are, introduce yourself and the work you do. And in particular, just for the introduction, if you can kind of talk about how your work is related to sort of plants as relatives and what that means in this climate change realm. So Deborah, I'll pass it to you first.
Mike, I'd like to see that picture because people ask, what do you do? I go, I present a lot, I teach, I go to workshops, I'm in airports, or used to be. So it's kind of hard to talk about what one does. So ani bonjour everyone, thank you for joining this session. Hopefully you had a chance to hear Robin's, oh, I see your name just coming up on screen. Robin's awesome talk. And so I'm like, we were talking just with this virtual age, literally I'm sitting in the same chair for like a year in the city of Toronto. But I'm Anishinaabe and I'm from Whitefish River First Nation. Great Lakes, so Manitoulin Island, Lake Huron, probably really not that far away by water to get to everyone, if I was able to visit people. I am, right now I'm at York University and I am at Osgoode Hall Law School and the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. I'm a cross appointment. And I guess I went there as a Canada Research Chair, which is Indigenous Environmental Justice, is kind of that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I had spent some time figuring out exactly what that was. But now I'm engaging in research, what I'm calling trying to assist Indigenous peoples in envisioning a climate change future, self-determine your own climate change future. What we do is, in Canada anyway, spend a lot of time kind of dealing with, spending energy on, reacting to other people's ideas of what the solutions are, as opposed to formulating what our own are, and basing what this future might look like based on our own teachings and our own language and our own laws and our own governance structure. So partly what I do is work with Indigenous knowledge and legal traditions, and trying to figure that out. The current project I'm working on, which I'm just starting to think through, by hiring, starting to try to figure out what students are suitable to work on this, because they're going to have to be able to deal with, accept a lot of what Robin talked about in order to be able to do this work. And the whole idea is, how do we live well with the earth? This idea of Namadzuin. So how does what I do relate specifically to climate change and community? In addition to that, the way that I've been thinking about plants, and I love the story that Robin told. Actually, I just told it, I think, last week to a youth leadership camp, in terms of humans are like brilliant and creative and innovative and all of those kind of things, but can also be, and it's kind of a choice. And when we're destructive, when I think about, and I also work with stories a lot, Anishinaabe stories, that we've had to face our destruction before that, because it was a destruction, and it's always because humans aren't behaving properly in relation to restoration. That's why it happens. And so we've had to face destruction before, and when, or in some states, when we've held off destructions, it's been the relatives who bail us out. So it's been like in that story. So Anishinaabe, all kinds of the stories that like Pipe into Eagle is, I consider to be a climate change story, Anishinaabe story, and we're bailed out by non-human relatives, basically, and they do it because of love for us and future generations. So that's a lot of the work I'm dealing with now, and trying to advocate that for B to be part of climate change solution and future. So that's not easy to do, because again, people have to have a different worldview to sort of work with that, right? So I'll stop there, because I'll be interested to hear what others have to say, and we can chat more about sort of where my thinking is along that kind of work. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, and look forward to hearing the other panelists and the discussion that happens afterwards.
Big Witch, thank you. Melanie, if you'd like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about plants and climate change to get us started.
Sure. Buju Bebamika Mikukwe Indigenicas Misquabikang and Junjiba Mikizi and Dodame. Melanie Montano, Red Cliff tribal member. So here at the very top of Wisconsin on the shores of Lake Superior. And I'm also the TEK outreach specialist for Glyphwick in the climate change program. And so the obvious connection is I'm right in the climate change program. But I've grown up harvesting, trapping, being involved in hunting, and also a lot of cultural ways, such as participating in our ceremonies. And I call myself a practitioner because I'm definitely not a specialist, such as my TEK's outreach specialist title holds. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm not really in academia at this time, but I'm definitely a practitioner of, the world around us, our ways, our traditions, the knowledge that our plants and medicines and everything hold. And so on a daily basis, I'm just trying to learn as much as I can about them, and also learning how to be a voice for them, which at times can get really challenging, especially in the climate change world that is filled with a lot of amazing scientists. I learn a lot from them on a daily basis, but it also tends to be, a challenge with some of the strong scientists in the room that have a hard time really shifting their thinking. And I'll just throw this in real quick that we recently have been discussing for a use of names, we've been discussing invasive species within Glyphwick lately, and that's held a lot of tension for us. With my upbringing and the elders that I learned from, we refer to them as non-local beings. And so it's been real interesting being involved in these conversations in the last couple of days and hearing them when people talk about, looking at those beings, the more than human ones that are around us, as gifts rather than resources. And I know Dan Wildcat had referred to an ATM machine, and, you know, and thinking about moving from the ATM machine to what Robin spoke of in that basket of berries. That's kind of what I struggle with on a daily basis. We're coming at these things with two different perspectives and two different knowledge sets. And so I'm constantly learning how to be a voice for those beings from a spiritual perspective, and remembering and constantly reminding people that those plants and trees and things around us, those ones that, you know, we rely heavily upon, they actually have spirits to them, and we refer to them as who rather than what. And so on a daily basis with Glyphwick, I help to incorporate some of that traditional knowledge that we gather from our elders and harvesters and gatherers into our climate change focused documents, such as a vulnerability assessment, which we're currently working on our second one right now. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of where I'm coming from. So with that, I'll save other words for later.
Big witch, thank you, Melanie. And Jeff.
Yes. My name is Jeff Grino. I've started my education back in the early 60s with the elder gatherings here on the reservation. They talked a lot about what they call the change in the weather, which was basically climate change. But these teachings started in the forest before any formal education started. Went to school, rebelled against nature, basically, and went to school as aerospace engineering. Came to my, came to my senses and went back to the forest. And I've been trying to integrate the cultural teachings in with the formal teachings of our school systems. I think that along the way, I started observing and preserving these old cultural areas out on the forest with the express purpose of preserving that knowledge in order to be able to share that knowledge with future generations like they did long ago. These areas contain garden areas, ceremonial areas, different types of knowledge and stories that continue to tell a story to this day. And each site is unique. So preserving each and every site is a priority. You know, at present, we're over 1,500 sites just here on the reservation, and they tell a story from basically 20 to 25,000 years ago through the present, up to the historic period, and up into the 1950s. And it's a gift of knowledge that continues to tell a story to this day. Each and every site, when I go return to the site, tells a little bit more of the story. And a lot of it is tied to their experiences going through climate change thousands of years ago. So the lessons are there to learn, and my goal is to preserve those, get as much information as I can off these sites, and then pass it on to the next generation to continue learning the stories.
Big witch, Jeff. Okay, great. Well, this is such a powerful way to start off the morning with all of your introductions and with Robin's words this morning. I thought I'd bring the thread through from Robin's talk here and just ask you to reflect upon what she kind of gave us to think about today. In particular, these are two things that I was reflecting upon. You know, how can we support the plants in their healing work? And that's also tied into her call for ecosystem restoration as a form of justice for the land. You can reflect upon that or something else that Robin said, because I know there are quite a few things that got us all thinking this morning. And I'll just kind of open it up at this point to any of you to kind of discuss this.
I guess I'll get started. You can just virtually point at whoever or whatever, or give the chin thing. It's your turn. But yeah, there's so much to say. I guess a couple things that really kind of stand out for me. That's top of mind. One is the role of language, and she also got this question as part of the Q&A stage, and it's also part of when I'm trying to wrap my head around language, like the role of language revitalization in climate change, or charting your climate change future. And so the way I'm thinking about it, and I appreciated what Robin had to say, is that language is also, as she said, reestablishing that relationship back, or helps to reestablish reciprocal relationships with plant life and other life, but also for particularly young people who may be looking at a future that doesn't look great. When we think about the IPCC reports that come out and the IPBES reports, like this dealing with biodiversity and species loss and IPCC on climate change, it doesn't look great. So that can be very daunting. So I look at language as also building resilience, being really key to our resilience in dealing with the future that we're going to face, that we can draw knowledge from language in terms of helping us chart that future. So I really appreciated her thoughts around language, and the question that she got along language as well. The other thing, because a lot of my work is always trying to wrap my head around Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous knowledge systems, is I agree, but I don't ever say it as beautifully as Robin does, is that I think we already do have the knowledge that we need to chart a self-determined future, not just for us, because well-being with Earth means well-being for not just for people, but for all the relatives and for all of creation. That it actually already exists. We just we've lost the ability to be able to listen to what the Earth is actually telling us. And climate change, I remember one youth saying this, people can find it on the Chiefs of Ontario website, this video on youth perspectives on climate change. And one of them said, climate change is the Earth telling us something, and we're not listening. Like, it's telling us what's happening to her, and we're not listening. So to me, a big part of it is being able to listen to that knowledge and that wisdom that's already there. And really cultivating our ability to be able to do that through our senses, and really trying to be able to listen and then act on the responsibilities in terms of already listen. So I agree that I think the knowledge that we need already exists. It's just trying to bring it to the fore, because all those are just like stories. Like, people have to realize that stories is actually knowledge, and it actually matters, and it's navigated us through difficult times before, because that's why we're here, right? Like, we've had to face our genocide and here we are, right? So our knowledge helps us do that. So that really stuck out in my mind. There's a lot more to say, but those two things are really resonating with me. Like, in my notes, they're like, big stars beside them. So hopefully, so those things are really really important to me that she talked about. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'll jump in quick and kind of go off of also what you were saying, Deborah. So one thing, I'll spend days processing what Robin shared, of course, because I just like sit with every word and realize that I have so much to learn, and there's so much knowledge out there, not just with Robin, but so many others. There's teachers all around us, and it's always amazing. So but the points that I wanted to go back on are things that I actually put little stars by in my notebook as well. But when she spoke of land as ancestral connection and land as a source of knowledge, but then also talked about how we can choose reciprocity, that kind of brings me back to a point, Deborah, that you said, the knowledge is still out there. So when we think of the land around us and all that it holds, the plants, the trees, the animals, and all those ones as being our relatives, that's where the knowledge actually lies. And so with that land being a source of knowledge and an ancestral connection, and those ones being our relatives, in some sense, that's our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and all those that came before us, and the spirits of those actual plants and animals. Those are our teachers. Those are the ones that hold that knowledge. But so that knowledge definitely is there. But, you know, with our generation, I remember when I was a little girl growing up, my parents used to bring me around to a lot of elders' homes. We used to sit at their tables and eat pie. I had to hear the stories and things. And when I was younger, I didn't quite understand why I had to spend my time doing that. And it's now, especially during this last year in times of COVID, that I really miss that. In some ways, I grieve for sitting at those kitchen tables with some of those old ones that have, you know, passed on, and realizing that, you know, that knowledge was at those kitchen tables, but it's also in the forest, in the lakes, and all those ones around us. And so I think that knowledge is definitely still there, but part of what has happened, especially with some of the younger generations, is those understandings of those connections and how to talk with our relatives, the human and the more than human beings. We've somehow had those connections broken, whether we've broken them ourselves or, you know, technology or whatever it may be has impacted our connections and our relationships. I think a big part of that reciprocity is returning to those relationships and trying to mend those and reconnect with those ones, both the human and the more than human. And in that, then we'll be able to gather that knowledge again and start living in reciprocity, as we then be able to share our gifts, learn what our gifts are, learn how to use our voices and things, and help take care of those ones that have been continuously taking care of us. So with that, I'll let Jeff add if you would like.
A wonderful talk that Robin gave. 4 things popped out at me. Western worldview. You know, my elders used to talk about the dangers of viewing the environment through human orientation, measuring it in human terms. If we can shift that view away from always looking at the environment through the human lens as a commodity to be used and abused. If we can shift that worldview, in order to shift that worldview, it has to start in the schools, in the very young schools, young preschool, kindergarten age grades, and work through the grade levels through the organized school system. Because when you think about it, as young people, as very young children, we all had that connection with the environment that we're seeking to return to as older adults. We always had that connection as a young child. Things looked infinite in size, and it was nothing to be able to talk to a rock or a plant or an animal, you know. That connection was there. That connection was slowly eroded and changed through organized schooling. So that changing of that human orientation starts at the very young age in the school systems, and continues throughout. Number 2, that cultural knowledge is possessed by the forest and the prairies and the environment itself, in the water, in everything around us. That cultural knowledge is spoken in its own language, an ancient, very elegant type of language that's going on all around us. We just have to relearn that language we possessed as young children before our formal schooling. Reconnect with the environment, to relearn things that the environment is trying to teach us. That's why you need to open up and and acknowledge that everything isn't in a human orientation, our world, our Western worldview, our scientific worldview in that fact. Number three, the affirmation or regeneration of forests and prairies is very important indeed, but you need to use that knowledge that the plants are teaching us in order to, in the best way, in the most honorable way, to reforest and repair the earth according to what the plants are telling us, they're trying to teach us. That sacred knowledge that that they give to us each and every day, that we often brush off and set aside because of our hectic days. Reforest, regenerating the environment in a good way. Understanding diversity, the plants are teaching us that, and we just need to listen. And the fourth thing is following that green path, that good way, in order for us to combat climate change. This good way, this good path, if we open up and relearn the ways of our youth when we were younger, this will give us the knowledge in order to graduate to the next level. I always say this over and over, that I've had a dream long ago that we as humans were 2-year-olds thrashing about in a enclosed room, and there were a row of plants on the outer edge of this room, our grandparents, and the feelings that I got off of those plants, that they were watching us, observing us as 2-year-olds thrashing about, wrecking things. They viewed us as their grandchildren, which they are. They're our grandparents. And I focus more in the dream about the feelings of the plants observing us than I did going about my activities, thrashing about the room. We need to listen and relearn and regain that ancient language that's being spoken all around us throughout the environment in order to show that we are capable and we are able to graduate to that age 3 as a society. And part of that starts our movement towards graduating out of year 2 to year 3 starts with relearning our cultural languages, building relationship with that language, because that language is animate. It's no different than you or I here. This animacy of the language must be brought back, because a language will die if it sits on a shelf in a museum, in a book. We need to reconnect with our languages, no matter what culture. Every culture needs to reconnect, because each language is rooted in the land that was gifted to the particular people. There's so much knowledge in the language that can be relearned and used for a particular area. That I can't stress enough, that animacy of language. We have to keep animacy in language, keep it evolving with the times. We can't let it become a museum piece. That's kind of the 4 things that stood out with Robin's brilliant talk. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you all. That was wonderful. And I think, Jeff, you beautifully lead us into the first question on my list, which is thinking about how can we make a broad societal shift to really understand plants as our relatives? And again, I'll just open it up to all of you as panelists.
Well, I
I'll
can
start
start it.
by,
Okay, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The-
I just finished talking, so go ahead.
I was just going to kind of go off more of what Jeff talked about when he, talks about the education system and things like that. I definitely feel that's where it starts, in the education system, but even outside of there, for those who may not be in formal education system at this time. But when I think of the education system, we have the structure in this curriculum that's lined out for us of things that we're supposed to learn. And I can give an example of the Bayfield School where I'm at, where a lot of our tribal kids, I think we're at about 80% or so of the population of the public school is Native American. However, one of the languages they're told they have to learn is French, which I think French is great and all, but I think about, what about place-based learning? We're told that we have to learn all these things that will apparently set us up in the world of success and to be able to pursue our dreams and things like that, and to be able to be stable and a great member of society and all of these, strange concepts. And for me, I think about place-based learning. Some of our own Native students, unfortunately, don't know much about the Lake Superior that we sit on, the plants that are around us, the trees, how to survive if we needed to. And so I think a lot of, in trying to teach people that plants are relatives, we need to return back to that place-based learning. And we can still teach those other subjects, and all of those things are fine and will be needed as we move forward. But when it comes to things like science classes, I reflect back on one of the biology teachers I had growing up when I was real young. He brought a bear into the classroom. He brought a mountain cat into the classroom. He had boa constrictors and things like that. And for me, that blew my mind. And it was so much more of an impact with me because we could actually have those ones in the room when we weren't able to get out into the forest and see them or whatever. And so then we were able to start drawing a direct connection with those ones. And he was a non-native, but he did talk about them as our relatives. And that to me was really effective in learning and, just connecting with the fact that they are our relatives when we can have them here and we're sitting here looking at them, talking about them. But then he would also bring us out into the streams to collect bugs and things like that. And I think that was what, for me, made the most impact, was actually realizing that that was part of our schooling rather than opening up a textbook and having to read, about biology, the cell level and things like that, when I thought, why does this even matter? Unfortunately, today that school doesn't have that teacher anymore because he had retired. But when I think about, returning or shifting people's mindsets to realizing the truth that plants are our relatives, I think it has to begin in that education system. And then we can utilize what's learned in that education system to kind of filter throughout the rest of the part of our lives as well.
I'll try next here. I think societal shift, understanding plants. A lot of it comes down to, like I said, the schooling, different curriculums, learning the language. I'll give an example of some of the old elder get-togethers. They used to, one old elder told me to identify a spot in the forest, one particular area, and then get to know that area, keep returning to it as often as possible. And he taught me the Menominee ecology about elder plant communities. The elder plant has a community of plants around it, not only above ground, but also below ground communities that are part of one big elder community. And he told me to return to that spot over my lifetime. And now it's been some 52 years I've been returning to the same elder plant community and learning from it, like going to class, like the organized schooling. It's like, you know what I mean? Putting in my time in the classroom, watching all this elder community changes over time, you know, how the plants will shift within a 5-year period to different positions within the community. The inner plants that are permanent members of the community, and then the outer edge plants that shift more rapidly and are shared back and forth between different elder plant communities in that particular area of the forest. The same thing goes for in the prairies, you know, elder communities in the prairies, but that's introducing these young students and the older high school and college students to viewing not only the scientific view, which is just as important, but being able to step back and look at everything interacts. Because my elders always talked about, you remove a plant from the forest and take it to, say, you know, to study it in a school. By removing it, you're removing it out of the environment, and the knowledge that you could gain from studying that plant is lost because it's not within the system or the community that it came from. By getting these students to acknowledge and observe in nature, just getting outdoors away from technology would help with the shift in understanding plants as relatives. But just taking regular field trips out to the forest was my greatest education. It's even though I went on to college for forestry, I pretty much set all that knowledge that I learned in the organized school systems aside, relearn the cultural teachings, and then I'm slowly integrating the science back into daily activities. But just getting back outdoors, getting that, you know, that acknowledgement that everything's interconnected out in the environment, and relearning that ancient language would go a long way to shifting attitudes to a better way.
I would echo what both Jeff and Melanie talked about. I think education is key right from really young kids, because I think they already kind of think that way because you haven't educated a lot of them yet. And so I find the younger the age group that I work with, the more accepting they are of these kind of ideas, because we haven't spent all kinds of time eradicating it out and getting them to just accept a particular kind of worldview. One of the things I've started to do in my courses, it doesn't matter whether I'm teaching in law or whether I'm teaching in environmental studies, is I send students outside. They have no idea, like I'm pretty sure they think I'm like crazy, but I build it into the assignments where they have to start using their senses to try to learn from the world around them, and they have to write a reflection on this, right? Because they're experiential learning courses. And they have to acknowledge, they also have to write a land acknowledgement, because when you have to know the people, as Robin pointed out, and same thing in Canada, all the land is Indigenous territories. Who are the people? What are the treaties there? What is the land? Who are the relatives? And we explicitly, one of the questions is, who are the non-human relatives? Is it water? Is it forest? Is it birds? Like, so yeah, so I think they're kind of, when I read the reflections, people like they're to talk about like, what did they think of the assignment? What eventually did they learn from it? And, you know, I have them for 13, 14 weeks. You can see kind of the development in a short period of time. And partly, I think, especially in this time of pandemic, it's also really stress management for them. Like, go outside and like try to use your senses other than always like, so being brain focused. Not a bad thing when you're in law school or graduate school, but you need to also exercise these other senses, these other intelligences that people have. And just as I listened to Jeff, I'm going to revise my assignment where they have to go back to the same place. Usually I give them other stuff to do, because over a course year here, there's still kind of seasons. So I teach a course starting in September versus when it finishes in December, the landscape's going to have changed dramatically. What did they notice? When did the ice come up? Like, when did snow come? So I think I'll just to sort of get them more thinking in terms of where they are also as part of a community. So I think people do need to learn about Indigenous peoples and Indigenous rights, but not forget about the people. The same thing with knowledge. People want Indigenous knowledge, but forget about the oppression of the people. So to me, I think part of the societal shift is to a whole bunch of things have to happen at a number of different levels. Like the education, sort of what I would call like the grassroots kind of community perspective has to be facilitated to have a voice. Like, we need to hear from community people like this conference, instead of just like boring academics who speak in really abstract kind of ways, right? Like most 4-year-olds don't really care about that, right? I don't even care about that on a good day. So, so really trying to, but then the top down is, and it's also research that I'm involved in as well, and Robin talked about this, is the rights of nature and the personhood. It's because that's recognition of that within the Western colonial legal system, which has its limitations, but at least it's kind of like people are thinking about that. They're just like, oh, it's a thing. It's not just theory. It's not just abstract. It's actually happening, right? And then the obligations and responsibilities that come with that. In the work that I do, I try to advance Indigenous legal traditions because they already do that. You don't have to like force it to make it fit or make it happen. It's already built into that system. And also governance systems. In Anishinaabe, our governance system is based on the clan system, which is completely related to non-humans. In BC, some of the non-human clans are plants, so that's not everybody's, that's not every Indigenous culture, but they do, I'm imagining, I can't speak on behalf of all Indigenous people, although sometimes I'd sit on panels and people expect that, cannot do that, is that they probably have their own tradition around this. We just have to bother to know, right? So I think a number of things have to happen at different levels and different advocacy. Because sometimes for societal change, you do have to kind of almost force people to start thinking about it, even if they don't necessarily accept it. Like a lot of people, they don't like in Aboriginal and treaty rights or UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but they have to deal with it, because it matters to Indigenous people. So whatever matters to us, other people have to start dealing with at some point. So yeah, I'll stop there, but I was really inspired by with Melanie and Jeff had to say, and gave me lots of ideas for my own teaching and assignments. So chimigwech for that.
Yes, me too. Exactly. I think I'm thinking of a few things. One is if folks haven't looked up the College of Menominee Nations sustainability model, the model on sustainability, that whole tie to place, that understanding of place and those relationships in place form a key, basically the way to understand sustainability and move us forward. So I encourage you can look it up on probably on the SDI or the College of Menominee Nation website. You can Google it, you'll find it. That's really important. And I hear all of you talking about that. Place-based education and ways to do that. And I'm helping teach, so I didn't come up with this activity, but I'm teaching a class right now that's between art and climate change. And so the lead faculty member is an artist, and she has the students, and this was in conjunction to an ecologist friend, have the students go out to the same spot. We call it the sit spot. So each week they're required to go out and do a reflection, and then in the end to create something. Not a paper, it could be, I guess, but mostly it's because it's more trying to get people to think on the creative side of what it means to be in relation with place. And so we see examples of different artists who might do, I don't know, you could think of all sorts of different art kind of creativity things, picking up litter, could be, I don't know, one student wrote a poem. You can create designs within, sort of like grasses, et cetera, that you might find, flowers, et cetera. It's been really, really wonderful to see that transition, or that transformation, Deborah, like you're talking about, over the semester. And then the final thing I'll say, and then we'll open it up for everyone else's questions, is that when I'm giving talks, I frequently encourage people to step back for just a moment. This is mostly for non-Indigenous people, but I'm trying to do this every day as well, and really try to understand what that means to be a relative. And we hear from our elders, we hear from our stories, and it's, on the surface, it's really easy. I think, oh yeah, these are grandfather tree, rock, etc. These are our relatives. Okay, but I say step back and just really, and I think this ties into that centering in place. If you can go out and be with your relatives, then you can start really thinking, well, I have a son and a daughter. I have my parents, right? I have my grandparents. I have my cousins, my nephews and nieces. I need to think of these plants as relatives as well on that same level. So then we can start asking ourselves, should we be doing these things? You know, what should we do in terms of fossil fuels? What should we be, how should we approach, as Melanie said, these other beings that are coming in that in science a lot of times are called invasive species. Well, how do we think of these other beings as relatives as well? And I think it will help us when we come up with solutions to our, I guess, to our problems here. So, oh, Sarah put the link to that model in the chat there. I'm going to start reading some questions, and I encourage anyone that would like to either ask a question to raise your hand. We've got about 15 minutes left. Raise your hand on the little icon. I think you can do that, or type it in the chat. So we have one here that says, I have a question. I study invasive species and would love, oh no, it's going to move on me, isn't it? And would love to hear a bit more about people's perspectives on the ethics and language around invasive species management. Sorry, it's a bit of a complicated question. A lot of the language around invasive species can make species seem like villains, which most scientists now recognize, but it can also be difficult to balance managing species that have really negative effects on ecosystems, but also recognize the rights of those plants and animals to exist. Now I'll just open it up again.
Can I answer that one, or give my answer to that one? A lot of the elder teachings talk about the earth as a whole, you know, that stepping back and understanding everything that's going on as much as you can. They talk about stepping back, or the earth as our grandmother. Now, there's a reason why these invasive species are moving from continent to continent, from place to place. They're moving because of a need for the whole system. There's grandmother earth is shifting plants to areas of need, basically. So we need to kind of alter our perception of what we, you know, how we look at invasives. You know, yeah, it could be damaging to an environment. That damage does not last usually more than 20 years. That plant is moving for a need in order to maintain the self-organization of grandmother earth. So if you could look at it with a little slightly different perception, a lot of times you can come up with answers of how to mitigate or slow down the perceived damage to the environment. It's a different way of looking at a problem, basically. You know what I mean? Taking a different viewpoint to find an answer or of what that invasive species is doing. So I want to throw it back for more discussion.
I guess what I'll add to that, so thank you for that, Jeff, is I guess a couple things, because they are thought about as being a problem a lot of the times, but which I think, like anything, you have to, I guess, just not uncritically sort of accept that, right? Like just to go, okay, well, are they always a problem, and where do they actually come? Like there's a lot of story behind it. I've been in meetings where people have said that some of them have been adapted into medicines, like people, indigenous people have started to use them as medicines. And again, as the question said, some people have said, well, they also have a right to live too. Maybe not take over all the other plants and colonize them, like that's the kind of word people use in forestry. But the other thing I think about too is in the, depends on which creation or recreation story it is, because there's even within a specific, like even in Anishinaabe, there's like over 100 different like creation or recreation stories. The Sky Woman brings those plants from the sky world, the tobacco and the strawberry. So those plants actually come from another world to help her survive in the new world. So we actually have teachings and stories around how we work with plants that actually come from another world. I think what it is, I guess a little bit of a different perspective on what Jeff talked about is we would apply a different lens or a different worldview to decide how they help or don't help, right? It's like anything. So we'll decide, we have a different framework for that, rather than you're on a list and you're invasive and we must eradicate you. Like you have to think about it in a more, I guess, holistic and a more messy kind of way. It's not like straightforward like that. So I think we have stories that speak to how we have a different framework for how we would assess that than how other people would assess that, I guess is what I'm trying to say is, so I'm reminded of that. So I try not to just say, to like draw the line and say, nope, it's this or it's that. It's like really listening and going, okay, well, what do our own stories, what does our own knowledge tell us about this? What are people actually saying in the community about these invasive plants? And maybe they are harmful for various reasons at particular times, and you need to do something about that, but other times they haven't been. So this is sort of, for me personally, I had to let go of that because I worked for Environment Canada and climate change, and invasive species were bad. And then when you went to the community, they thought about it in different ways. So I had to go, okay, let go of that and start listening to what people are actually saying and what do our stories actually say about this. So that's all I'll add to what Jeff said. So no nice, neat answer to that, but I think that's the point. There isn't a nice, neat answer to this. We have to talk and we have to engage and we have to we have to engage with different knowledge that's going to inform any kind of decision, adaptation, management, whatever you want to call it, relationship with these plants.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated, and it's going to be complicated because, when we work with a group of scientists in the room and, they're pointing out the fact that, say, emerald ash borer, for example, is going to be devastating to our black ash. One perspective is looking at that in a place of panic, basically. If we lose our black ash, we lose our black ash baskets, we lose that knowledge and that goes along with making those baskets. We lose the language that we may use when we talk about black ash. And so in a sense, that's changing our culture. But I like to step back and think about it that we've always been an adaptive people. We've always been changing as Indigenous people. We change to what's in our environment around us, and that's how we've survived all of these years. But if we come at it from a perspective of remembering that everything we've just been saying, those plants are our relatives, they may be distant relatives because they're so-called invasives and from another country, but they're still our relatives at the end of the day. And I think it's important to step back and try to understand what they may be teaching us, whether we brought them here or they came on their own. They adjusted, like you're speaking to, Jeff. They're coming here out of need. I think about my own relatives. A lot of my family members relocated to Milwaukee when I was young because they had to. There was something there that they needed. They had to go for jobs or whatever it may be. And those plants are doing the same thing. coming for a reason, either if, you know, the people didn't bring them here, but they came here because they're maybe filling a need. And I think the important thing is to step back and really get to know them as our relatives. What are they offering? We can't always jump to the negative and, you know, what they may be impacting, but what gifts are they bringing? How are they helping us? And realize that they have spirit too. They're not just, you know, this negative thing from out of our area, but they're a gift on this earth that was, again, as you said, Deborah, placed here before us humans. Us humans came last. And so there's something there for us to learn from them. And I think it's important to try to step back, take time, listen, observe, and speak with them, ask them, put out your tobacco, put out your bundles, try to understand what it is we're supposed to be learning from them. And we have a responsibility to do that.
Wonderful. With the emerald ash borer, I'm just going to add, we also need to be listening to our Indigenous community. So the scientists need to listen to what we're saying. And I remember a story where, so the emerald ash borer came into Detroit area, right? Right across is Canada, and we have the Walpole First Nation Potawatomi community that is right there. And the Canadian government at that point, the scientists, right, they thought, okay, well, if we can just cut a swath, you know, basically cut every ash tree, and it'll form a buffer so that if there's no ash trees for them to travel, they won't go to the other side of this. And there wasn't, as far as I understand, there wasn't a lot of consultation there, and that happened. And the tribe First Nation was not in favor of that. That wouldn't have been the recommendation that they would have put forward. And so very quickly after that, the government and the scientists realized this isn't going to work. We're not going to be able to cut our way around this population of insects. We need to think of a different way to exist with this bug. And so that could have been avoided. So then you have this First Nation with all their ash trees gone, essentially, or a huge chunk of them, with no chance of finding any resistant trees, et cetera, or working with those trees as they sort of find their own footing now with this new bug here. So yes, I would add listening to our Indigenous people as well. Okay, so I know we're going to run out of time. We have till 12:25 according to my, oh no, 12:35. Oh, awesome. We're doing great then. Okay, so I'm going to read a question from Hannah Jo King. Hannah Jo is one of our wonderful graduate students here at the University of Minnesota, and I work with her very closely. And she says, Chimigwich to all the panelists and facilitation for the meaningful conversation. Something I would love to hear about is, who are some of the plant relatives you have been deeply learning with recently? What are they teaching you?
How many days do we have for an answer? Go ahead, Jeff.
For me, especially visiting the elder plant communities, you know, there's several on the reservation here now in different habitat groups. But that knowledge is actually, for me, is extended below ground. As a forest regeneration forester, I would never view what plants I was planting above ground. It was what is it doing below ground. So a lot of the knowledge now is coming from the fungi environment for me, myself. An acknowledgement from these communities that climate change is truly being fought below ground, as opposed to our thinking of the above ground plants. So the real battle is going on below ground in the fungi environment and micro environment below ground. So that's kind of some of the knowledge that's been passed to me lately.
I guess so I like that. We have to fight it below ground, right? I don't think I've heard that before. So Chimigwech for that. For me, there's actually two plant relatives that have been hugely influential in terms of what I'm thinking about, to the point where they pretty well direct my research. One of them is birch, the birch tree, and stunningly, Whitefish River is also known as Birch Island if you're up on the island. So literally, I live in a place called Birch Island, and I never noticed them before. And what I decided to do in this research and trying to figure out how can we live well, and again, the knowledge already exists, so a lot of it's like really engagement with, you know, the natural world and elders and people in community and language revitalization and everything else. So and I guess in these circles that I find myself in, these climate change circles that are very techno-scientific fix, we need to tweak this policy, like really, you know, fine, but clearly not solving the problem. So I thought, and the way they think about Indigenous knowledge is we don't have a baseline. So we can't really measure what the changes are, and these stories from elders, not real knowledge, like still kind of dealing with that, right? Despite everything. And so I said, well, actually we do. It's the 13 moon system. Things were supposed to happen at certain times of the year according to the moon, right? And so this whole research is around the 13 moons and what the moon's telling us, and also what's happening, like the relationship of you know, a number of different entities during this time. And so I thought, well, every time, even though I live in Toronto, I work in Toronto, I go home during the 13 moons. So I'll be leaving again this week to be up there for because you need to have, like, as Jeff said, the place, right? You need to have the place that you go to. So when I first started this in November, like, you know, lockdowns and this and that, I couldn't travel as much, couldn't get into the community. They had restrictions, had to get COVID test, everything else. So I couldn't go when I wanted to go. So when I started to go, it was fall, and you really notice the birch trees. They're beautiful at that time of year because the leaves are down. So you can finally notice the tree. Like in the summer, it's hard to find them because there's so much green all around. And in the winter, it's hard to see them because of the snow, because it's white. And so I'm just like, wow, like it's literally shimmering. And I would go when it was full moon, like, you know, when it's full moon and it's so bright outside, it's like daylight, it's just shimmering. So I go to this spot. I'm looking forward to it, to go there. Like, what is happening? Like, what is the birch trying to tell me about? So I'm looking forward to that, like going there. It's going to be slogging through some mud. So this one tree that I particularly like, it's like my frame of reference for like everything that I'm doing right now, and just how calming it is. And in the winter I skied there, and I go, this is the tree. I'm telling my husband, this is the tree. That's like my whole, I guess, the PI for my research basically is this particular tree. But I really noticed them, and I hadn't all these years, even though I grew up there, and I live in a place called Birch Island. And so the other trees that's really significant to me and my family is the maple trees, because we have a maple sugar bush. And I started to think about what are they telling us about the time of year that they come. And there's a number of different Anishinaabe stories about how maple sap came to the people. It was a gift, but the gift comes from the tree. And that gift comes when we're at a time of major food insecurity. In our stories, like our food stores are down. It's actually hard to move through the bush at that time, where I am anyway, because it's sort of, the snow's like, you know, when you step on it, one leg goes 3 feet deep and the other one's still on the snow, and you're like trying to, like, it's hard to hunt then. You can't go that far. So that's when the sap runs, and it's very nutritious and sweet and can give you energy. So that tree basically saved us, like as Anishinaabe, from starvation. So it comes at a really, really critical time, bailing us out of sure death in a lot of our stories. So the maple tree, because my family we still go in the bush, and so it's broader than just me learning from those trees. So those are two of them that are really significant for me. And this year, sugar bush changed a lot. Like usually, like I'm reading my dad's diary. He's since passed away. And actually today, maybe a couple of years ago, is when we finished the camp, the sugar camp. But this year it was finished at the end of March because of the weather changing. And I worry about how all these changes are going to affect the ability to be able to pass on knowledge and relationship with those with those trees in order to be able to maintain their health. But whatever it is that our family is doing, we're engaging with those, relating to those trees appropriately, because the First Nation decided they were going to send in foresters to go see the health of the tree. And different families have different camps in the community. It's doing great. So I go, my dad knew what he was doing. in terms of which trees were going to be tapped, which years, which ones were going to get a rest. And we won't do that pipeline system. I didn't know it was called pipeline system, you know, that whatever it is that people do to gather the sap, because he said that you start taking from that tree rather than receiving a gift. It's a very different idea. It's actually an Anishinaabeg law. You cross that line, like to receiving, to receive, to taking something, to receiving a gift. So those are, yeah, I could go on, like Melanie's question, I could go on and on and on. I'm so excited. This is going to be years of research. But those are completely my teachers at the moment and the frame of reference for what I do. Yeah, and so that particular birch tree is sort of like the principal investigator really kind of on this research, but at the same time taking guidance from the moon. That's when I know when to go, because it forces discipline on me, because it's so easy to get sucked into the virtual life and email and writing, that kind of life, that, oh no, full moon coming, gotta go. So so that's sort of, I'm actually orienting my life at the moment. So miigwech for that question. You can tell I'm really excited about this. So so thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to share that excitement because I too, you know, like I said earlier on when we were introducing ourselves, I do a lot of harvesting and gathering and things like that. And I recently finished up with our sugar bush. And then from there, I moved to spearing our walleye at night. And so for me, it's really hard when it comes to plants. You know, when in my generation, anyhow, when a lot of people were kids, they kept little things like sticker books. And I have to admit I had one sticker book, but I also had a lot of those same sticker books that were actually filled with plants. And I had this really weird way of pressing plants when I was kids. When I was a kid, I would put them in those photo album type things. And I dig them out every now and then because they're actually pretty well preserved. But apparently I would geek out about plants when I was a kid too, and try to share and exchange those when I was younger and the other kids around me didn't quite get it. So it's really hard to think about, you know, what your favorite is or what kind of excites you or what you're researching or whatever, because they're all just completely fascinating. But mine seem to tend to go depending on what I'm harvesting at the time. And so like the season 4 Namapin harvesting, which is a wild ginger, I think that's one of the most amazing plants. When I was doing sugar bush, the maple and all that's around the maple was really exciting. But it's hard to, you know, zone in or focus on one being when once you get out there and everything is so fascinating. It reminds me again of that old biology teacher. When I would go out in the woods with him, he would crawl around on the ground and sniff things and look at them super up close. And I thought, this guy is like got some crazy passion, and I loved that about him. And so it's really difficult, you know, in thinking about those particular ones. But if I have to answer that, one thing I've been thinking about year round, because I've been able to do a little bit of more learning about fire, is the fact that a lot of our plant beings that make up our traditional kinnikinnick, so not the commercial tobacco, but our mixture of kinnikinnick, is all of these different plants that are either dependent on fire or they're fire adapted. And so I think about things like blueberries and sweet fern, and some of those other ones I think are really fascinating and kind of at the front of my brain right now.
Oh, this is great. And now, as I said before, when I thought we ended at 12:25, we will be running out of time before we can get to all the questions. There was a question about language, somebody that's working in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan, and as a non-native person to learn some language. I highly recommend reaching out to the tribes in your area. I think you mentioned Grand Traverse is by where you are. That's a great thing. Most of our tribal websites have a language page. We also oftentimes have language circles and things that are, I guess, many of them can be open to non-tribal members. So that's a great thing to learn the language. Also, if you're interested in Ojibwe or Dakota language, I know that the University of Minnesota has, especially with the Zoom environment now, they have community-based sort of classes. You can sign up for credit, sign up for not credit, and they've been running these sort of virtual classes for many years. There's also an Ojibwe People's Dictionary that the university maintains. So those are all good good resources for that. There were a few questions about invasive species to keep that going, but we're not going to be able to get to that with our 2 minutes left. I'm gonna end with merging my final question with the last question here. This is coming from a language, Menominee language teacher, an immersion language instructor, and second language learner. And they ask, what advice would you have for young teachers who are working to move away from Western teaching models and more towards traditional teaching methods? And I'll add in my last question for you. What hope do you have for the future? I think these two things are very related.
I'll jump in real quick. I have hope watching some of our youth growing up and some of the resurgence and reconnecting that they're doing with the environment around us. I have to brag a little bit and throw this out there that tomorrow the keynote speaker is actually my son, Bazil Panik. And some of the things that he talks about and some of the things that he's passionate about is, you know, along with my other children, it brings me hope. I have hope for the future when I look at some of those young ones.
I'll just, because I don't teach that age group, although I guess I had kids, I would just really encourage kids, or if you're an educator, to get them to trust their senses, because they touch, they feel, they want, you know, and then everything about education just gets them to just become very abstract and very kind of book based. And I love books. I'm the first one to just love sitting down and reading a book. Then you start losing that ability to be able to listen beyond that. And then I kind of get them later, and then you're trying to reteach them that, and I say, you used to be able to do this, like you used to be able to do it. And then so really trying to get them to maintain that and then trust it would be what I would suggest, because they already have it. And then it's hard later to get them to actually respect it as being a real thing, like to see and to touch and to feel, like those things are actually really really important in learning.
And as far as how to start with how to teach the different ways, you need to recognize that, you know, I always say there's two different types of perception. You know, you got the science, which is sight, the brain, observation, and then there's the indigenous way, or the way that I was taught by the elders, using all the senses, like Deborah has mentioned. Learning to use all the senses. You're pulling in the information from all different types of information, and just recognize that there are two different types of perception. You know, our education system is based off the scientific viewpoint, how to view the environment. But just recognizing the two different ways of perceiving the environment is a good way to start. And one thing I'd like to leave off is we never talk much about getting back to that worldview or shedding that human orientation. Is, you know, one aspect of that is to continue and reintroduce our ceremonies, you know, in our relationship with the environment. You know, it's so important to continue our cultural ceremonies. You know, that was one of the gifts that were given by the Creator to the human species, is our ability to conduct ceremonies in our relationship with the environment. So that's kind of like what I'd like to conclude. And thank you.
Which everybody, Mackelwanen. I would like to just thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. This was wonderful, and we thought it was difficult following Robin, but you all really taught so much, and I feel like the connections between her talk and our panel here were just amazing. Thank you so much. Please fill out the survey. There was a link in the chat if you scroll there. The next sessions start at 12:45, so we went a little over, but we have enough time, I think, to get something to eat or what you need. And I'll see you in the next session. Thank you, everybody.
Miigwech.
Equetch,
Go
great
up
big
and-
hands going at the camera. Do it more.
Yes.
discreetly. Yeah, just Equetch,
Equetch.
everyone. Yeah.